Hello, welcome to more Perils in Paradise star ratings. Today we have, I think it is Priest, Hunter, and Warrior. Also, just to let you know, currently as I record this, as of the 17th of July, we're having the Theorycraft streams on the Play Hearthstone Twitch page, so if you want to see some of these decks in action, go there and watch them. Already, from what I've seen from some of the other people's decks, I think there's a few cards I would like to change the ratings on that I've done already in the past, that I can't do now. Mainly, actually, the Death Knight location is doing a lot better than I thought, and I nearly put it as a 4-star card. I thought Rainbow Death Knight might run this, and I thought, no, maybe they won't run it, maybe it's too expensive, and it turns out it's actually just blowing people out the water right now, that location, so I may have got a few cards wrong already, but as I said, this is going to be a really hard set to rate. Anyway, let's get down to rating the cards for the sets, the classes I just mentioned. First up, we have Priest. Priest has a obvious package here. It's the main package of a pain package with Brain Masseuse, Acupuncture, Hot Coals, Nightshade Tea, Sensory Deprivation, and Sauna Regular. Now, obviously the intention of this is you run it with the Demon Hunter, Tourist, which has a payoff for taking damage to your hero. However, it's really not a big enough payoff to run this pain package, in my opinion. Your real payoffs are Sensory Deprivation, the Sauna Regular getting cheaper, and Arana, but it's kind of hard to set up the Arana. It's a one-off legendary, so it's not going to be often that the card is going to be in your hand. There are other pain cards you can set up with, for example, Barrel Brim or the Lava Giant. However, at that point, I got thinking, why would you not just play Pain Warlock? Pain Warlock is already a tier 2 deck, maybe tier 1 deck after this set. They've got Vona added to their deck as well. Like, they have some seriously, like, scary cards. The other thing about Pain Warlock versus Pain Priest is Pain Warlock can actually stabilize a little bit better than this deck, because I think you're going to be running Demon Hunter Priest, and Demon Hunter doesn't quite have the level of healing that a Priest would have. It doesn't have something like Infernal, basically, that if you do crank your health total down to, like, you know, the nuts, you need something to get you back up to 15, and Infernal is very good at doing that, and this deck just simply lacks it. So I think, honestly, the best place that this Arana and maybe Acupuncture see some play is in Fatigue Demon Hunter, where you'll try and draw through your entire deck, and then you'll play Arana and try and draw like 7 or 8 cards and just kill your opponent that way. That being said, I don't think it will work. I put it together a deck list for that off camera, and I just thought I'd rather play the Shaman Demon Hunter deck, or I'd rather play just some other aggressive deck, and I think they would always beat that deck. As a result, I've come to the conclusion that all of these cards are 1 star. I don't think this will be a tier 3 deck. I don't think it'll be a tier 4 deck. I just don't think it will work. The payoff of Hot Coals, which is very minor, Sensory Deprivation, which I think is fairly minor, to be honest with you, and Sauna Regular, which is okay, but again, you have to do 5 separate incident damage to your own hero. I think they're just a little bit too expensive, and it'd be easier just to do it in Warlock instead. Then we have 3 cards that go towards this control package: Rest in Peace, Narain Sooth Fancy, or Sooth Fancy even, and Twilight Medium. Some nice cards here. Rest in Peace is very good for getting Unkiliax back, or to get, obviously, Amantal, and then Amantal can remove the opponent minion, or Ziliax can just trade into it with poison, and ideally, you know, that gives you a non-symmetrical effect. However, do I think any of these cards really solve the issue of Control Priest right now? And I came to the conclusion, no, it doesn't. I think the big issue for Control Priest right now is they just can't deal with the early game aggressive decks right now. They basically just have Serenity and Holy Nova holding the fort. Serenity doesn't always get kills, Holy Nova also doesn't always get kills, and sometimes you don't draw those 2 cards. The Priest really needs like a Defile-esque type card, which is a little bit more consistent at killing multiple early game minions. Currently, Control Priest, or at least Highlander Priest, is sitting around tier 3 deck, and I think these cards will slot into that type of archetype, so I've given all of them 3 stars. I just don't think it's quite there for Control Priest right now. And then finally we have Chillin' Vol'jin, a card that I actually despise. I think this card is really horrible. If I was rating it on the card quality alone, I would give it 1 star. However, obviously, it's worth more than the effect of the card. It gives you access to the Hunter cards. And I've seen a lot of people going, you know, why would you go Priest Hunter? What is the synergy? Why would you do this? And I'll tell you why in a moment. I've come up with a genius idea, which is why I'm giving Chillin' Vol'jin 5 stars. There's one deck in particular that I think, again, will run Vol'jin solely to get access to some Hunter cards, because it will make its deck better. And currently the deck I'm thinking of is a tier 1-ish deck. like bottom end of tier 1, high end of tier 2, and I think this will elevate it out of 2 back into 1 again. Anyway, let's get to the Hunter cards, and we'll explain more there. Maybe you'll understand my logic when you see the Hunter cards. They are Catch of the Day, Pet Parrot, Trusty Fishing Rod, Bird Watching, Chatty Macaw, Parrot Sanctuary, Sasquatch, and Ranger Gilly. I've sort of accumulated these together of these play cheap 1-cost cards, replay battle cry type things, play spells. Honestly, the Hunter package seems a little bit all over the place to me, so I'm going to dissect this into what I think will happen with these cards. At one point during the reveals, I said I thought maybe you'll do some sort of Parrot Sanctuary combo with Freebird. Maybe you'll put the Bird Watching in that deck as well to give you potentially multiple copies of these charging birds. Try and discount them to one so the Pet Parrots replay them, that type of thing, and maybe you can set up some combo that way. I tried to put that deck list together and I just couldn't make it work. So for now, I actually think Parrot Sanctuary is 1-star. I don't quite see the combo that you would put together with Parrot Sanctuary. It's very similar to the Shaman location that does see a little bit of play, but I wouldn't say that was pulling up trees, and I think this location is weaker than that one, so I could be wrong, but I think it's only 1-star. Similarly, Chatty Macaw, I actually really like the effect of this card, but it's so oddly specific for the current set that I just don't see where you would play it right now. Because, note, it's not just repeat the last spell that was cast, it has to be one that was cast at an enemy. And when actually you go through the list of cards through both Priest and Hunter, and actually into Warrior, because obviously you can tour it into Warrior, there's not that many great options that you could recast. Now, there are 2 in Hunter. Spoilers for the future, I just don't see what deck you would put them into. I don't think Control Priest particularly wants those 2 single-target removal cards. Maybe Highland Hunter would use it, but I think Highland Hunter will be using Big Rush Beasts instead. I think that's their typical jam, so I'm giving 1-star to Chatty Macaw, but just note, this card could be really broken if it gets the right support for it. And I don't think it's a million miles away, but I think you want something a bit more aggressive than the single-target removal cards that we've currently seen. Next, we move on to Catch of the Day. Obviously, the intention of Catch of the Day is that you cheat it out with Trusty Fishing Rods. I don't think that is what you're going to be doing most of the time, though. And actually, the reason I've given it 2 stars is thanks to somewhat of my genius. So, I was putting together a potential deck list of Warrior and Hunter, basically using Ranger Gilly. And obviously the package for that is some sort of hand buffing light deck with the drinks and other stuff like that. I'll get to the hand buff package a bit later. And in all of this, I was throwing in a bunch of cards. I was actually putting in like the Amalgam, trying to make Giga Amalgam, blah, blah, blah. I put the Trusty Fishing Rod in to fetch the Amalgams, blah, 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 blah. And eventually I put Hollowhound into the deck. And suddenly, a bolt of lightning came to me. I had like an epiphany. Same with actually the other deck that I've got an epiphany for in a moment. And I got thinking, why don't we play Cleave Hunter anymore? Okay, there are reasons why we don't play Cleave Hunter. The Gargan has rotated out. That went out with Murder of Castle Nathria. However, I wonder if you can get a Cleave Hunter deck with Hollowhound where you crank the ever-loving nuts off the hand buff package, make a ginormous Hollowhound, put always a bigger Yourmonger on it, and then one of the other weaknesses of Cleave Hunter was you just never played multiple minions versus Cleave Hunter. You always just played one big guy, or you tried to play one big guy. What if you force your opponent to have a small guy? And that's Catch of the Day. Play all this combo, play a Catch of the Day, your opponent is guaranteed to have at least 1/2/1 worm. If they have another minion on board, you hit either one, you hit one of the minions, and you're going to potentially do, in my evaluation, you might end up doing like 20 plus damage to them on this Yourmonger combo. Obviously, it depends what the big minion is that they have, but I think people will get caught out by this, so I don't think it's actually going to be a very good deck, but it might catch people out. So I've given it 2 stars. I think it's a bit of a niche interaction. I only put 1 copy of it into that deck as well. You probably won't run it, though, is my opinion. Anyway, this brings us on to Ranger Gilly and Bird Watching, which I've both given 3 stars to. I actually think the Hunter Warrior hand buff deck will be a tier 3 deck. I think it's going to be less consistent than hand buff Paladin. It's also not going to be as proactive as hand buff Paladin, which is typically at least summoning minions, even though they're understated at first, and eventually get some big boys out there. However, there's going to be a big combination, and I'll talk about this when we get to Warrior, with Concierge and the Tidepool Naga, I forgot what it's called now, the Tidepool, whatever it is, Splasher. I'm bad with names. And then the drinks, and just discounting them to 0. And eventually you're going to cast like potentially 9+ drinks in a turn. You're going to Giga buff all the minions in your hand. and something will happen. You're probably going to have Leroy in your hand realistically for charge. You might have the Cleave Hunter package in there. It's going to be something along those lines. Maybe even have Freebirds in there for another charge minion. I think it's going to be a little bit too slow, a bit too ponderous, so I've put it in tier 3. Now, here's where we get back to the Priest section. I think the remaining cards could all see play in Priest, specifically Pet Parrot and Trusty Fishing Rod, and I think Sasquatch may also make the cut of this deck. So I'm giving... Oh, just before I get into that, I forgot about this as well. I think this hand buff deck will also run these cards which reward you for having increased attack stats or just increased stats in general. And they're also all beasts, and you can run a lot of hand buff beast cards in Hunter, so I think they will be ran together. Anyway, back to these 3 cards. I think these will all be 5-star. The deck I think they're going to go into is Zarimi Priest. Zarimi Priest has 4 1-cost dragons in there. It's normally 2 Splish Splash Whelps and 1 Ship Chirurgeon, or how you pronounce that. And they are good dragons in the early game, right? They want to play 8 dragons to get Zarimi's effect off. They also run, is it called Constellation Projectionist or Project, something along those lines. It's now a 3 mana, get a copy of a minion on your board. It's only a temporary copy, you have to play it on that turn. That card being nerfed actually took the edge off that deck, and it dropped it from being pretty high in tier 1 to like skirting the border right now. Why would you not just run Pet Parrot? Pet Parrot, make sure you always get the 1-cost dragon. It's basically back to 2 mana on the projectionist, and it's actually better than that because you don't have to play the minion from your hand, it repeats it. Also worth noting that these dragons, one of them is a Battle Cry, which will be repeated with the repeat effect of Pet Parrot, that's Splish Splash Whelp. The other one is Ship's Chirurgeon, which doesn't have a Battle Cry, and its effect will go off on anything summoning. Also worth noting Zarimi isn't unplayed, it's unsummoned, which also means that Trusty Fishing Rod will work with it. So you play your Trusty Fishing Rod, you're going to pull out all of your 1-cost dragons, and spoilers, the only 1-cost minions you'll run in your deck are dragons. By the way, one other dragon I think will get it into that deck is actually the Amalgam. I forgot what it's called now, this adaptive amalgam, the Immortal Prelate Amalgam. I think all of these decks with this amalgam, and I'm going to get to this in the star ratings for tomorrow, I think they're all going to be memes. I don't think any of them will work, but actually the one place where it'll find play, and I think it will be a tier 1 deck, is Zarimi Priest, solely because it's a dragon, by virtue of being an amalgam. And I think you'll put 1 copy of that into your deck, and it'll just be this dragon that comes back and back and back and back with your Trusty Fishing Rod. Also, the Zarimi Priest deck does buff the minions on board, so it's actually somewhat worth getting it back again via the Trusty Fishing Rod. Finally, Sasquatch is another nice value addition. I've kind of given it 5 stars. I'm not sure it's going to actually get into the Zarimi Priest deck. It might do just to give you, again, more dragons. But it's going to be in so many Hunter decks, I think, going forward. So I kind of just kept it in the 5-star tier. I think Highlander Hunter will probably run this as well. I think it will also go into this Hunter Warrior package where I said you're going to cast all of these Drinkies with your Concierge. And maybe the turn afterwards, you play Sasquatch to get all of that stuff back again. And I think there is a realistic scenario where you're going to be getting like plus 18, plus 9, I think, fairly reliably on that combo. And if you Sasquatch it again, I don't care what the minion is in your hand, your opponent is going to struggle to deal with that bad boy. So I just think it's going to be a bit of a slow, ponderous deck is my issue with that. But because Sasquatch is going to see many decks, I think it will get into Zarimi Priest, by the way. Even if it just copies, I nearly said Astalor, if it copies, I forgot the name of the Titan. I'm trying to call it every name under the sun right now. But you know what I mean, the Priest Titan, I still think that alone is worth a Sasquatching, so I can see it seeing play in that deck. Finally, we have Furious Fowls and Death Roll. I probably spoiled it already with the Chatty Macaw. I've given both of these 1 star, not because I think the cards are bad. I really don't think they're bad. I actually really like Furious Fowls, and I quite like Death Roll. Obviously, they're both the targeted spells you would want to do with the Chatty Macaw. I just think there isn't really a Hunter deck right now that wants to use them. I'm not an expert on the Highlander Hunter deck, I have to hold my hands up. I've not played Highlander Hunter for quite some time, but I don't think they would run these cards. I think they just want big beasts with Rush, so they're pretty settled on that. I have ran Control Priest decks, and I don't think they would want to run these single target removal cards anyway. I don't think Priest really has a desire for fairly expensive single target removal, so because of those reasons, I've only given both of these cards 1 star, but there is a world that if maybe there is a bit of a slower Hunter deck out there, maybe they'll make the cut of those decks. Finally, we go into Warrior, and I think Warrior... Actually, the Warrior Druid one, so you're going to have to watch this episode and the next episode. I think this is one of the most exciting ones. I think generally it's the most exciting one amongst the community, where everyone can just see this is going to be like a really strong deck. I split it up slightly into two packages. One of the packages is some sort of like hand buff package and minions that benefit from the hand buff. The other package is Taunt, and actually a lot of those Taunt minions also benefit from the hand buffs, but I'll deal with them in a moment. The first four I want to deal with are Cup of Muscle, Char, Undercut Calamari, and Draconic Delicacy. I've alluded to this already. I think there is going to be a lot of decks, and it's not just in this archetype. I think we'll also see in Druid Mage. And actually, if you've watched any of the theory crafting stream right now, a lot of people are playing Druid Mage, because Concierge can take some of the drinks that are 1 cost and turn them into 0 cost spells. And whenever you get a 0 cost spell in Hearthstone, normally you can break the game with it in some way, and they've been indeed breaking the game. Unfortunately, Cup of Muscle Circle is a little bit slower than the Mage one, for example, which could actually, kill your opponent on that turn. Cup of Muscle is really setting up for a future turn, but the idea is that if you get your 2 Cup of Muscles in hand, you play Cup of Muscle, you play the drinks that come from it, yada yada yada. That's suddenly for Concierge, it's 3 mana, gain 12, 6 in stats. Then you play your Tide Pupil for 1 more mana, and you get your original Cup of Muscle out of it. Muscle? Oh my god, I'm getting Peglin now. You get your Cup of Muscle out of your Tide Pupil. Hey, that's another 6+3 on top of your hand buffing. And you just keep playing the cards, and then suddenly your minions in your hand are scary boys. For example, if you hit your Undercut Calamari, it's probably going to trade with a minion. Draconic Delicacy is going to be really hard to remove, at least via minions. And then, moreover than that, if you're playing the Hunter Warrior combo, you could Sasquatch the next turn and get all of these cards back again. And by the way, not only are you going to get the stat line from all the cards you played, you're also going to get the Cup of Muscle Circle 1 drink left, or 2 drinks left, and the 1 drink left from that as well, I believe. So it's actually unreal value you potentially can get from this. So we'll see with this. Anyway, I do say, and I've said before, I think this is going to be a bit ponderous. So I've actually given 3 stars to the Cup of Muscle Circle thing. I think it's going to be a tier 3 deck. I think Hand Buff Paladin is just a little bit faster at doing the business than this. So that's kind of where I am at. The other 3 cards I've actually given 2 stars to, and I kind of was a bit on the fence about it. I think 2 of these cards out of the 3 of them will make the Hunter Warrior list. I think the most likely of these 3 cards is actually Char and Undercut Calamari. Draconic Delicacy has an unfortunate situation that it's got a dragon moniker on it, and there's actually a different dragon I'd like to put into that deck and tutor for it with a card we're going to see in a moment. I do really like Draconic Delicacy. I could see it in some sort of control deck, but I've just not been able to put it in any of my decks, therefore I've given it 2 stars. Similarly, the Calamari has the advantage if you're playing Hunter Warrior that it's a beast, so it actually synergizes with the beast buffing cards from Hunter. So I definitely see that being a strong contender, and actually a single target removal in Hunter isn't a bad thing, especially if you're playing it with an overbuffed card on it, so I can see the dream on that. And then finally, Char. It's reasonable, it's decent, but I don't think it's particularly exciting, so I kind of put it into the 2-star range. Now, we also have this Taunt/Mana Cheat package of Line Cook, Monsterosity, Ham the Hungry, All You Can Eat, the Rye Cleaver, and Food Fight. Obviously, there are synergies with Monsterosity and these hand buff cards. And actually, in my opinion, the package that will be really strong from this is a Taunt Warrior Druid package. And my version of it that I've made a deck list for has the Taunt buffing minions in there from... I can't remember what the set is now, but there's a couple of cards where it's like buff all Taunt minions in your deck and buff all Taunt minions in your hand. I think you'll use those cards, and I also think you might run the Riff package so that you can draw and buff. And if you hit like Monsterosity with a Riff, 9/12 that copies itself is really good. I don't think you need to go through this whole spiel of Cup of Muscle Circling with Concierge. I think it's just too many moving parts for one deck. Maybe Char does make that list as a single target remove, but I think more to the point of this big Warrior Druid deck, you're probably going to put in Warrior cards that help you survive until the mid to late game when you can get off these giant Taunt minions. And that's the way I think it's going to work. I do think this is going to be a tier 1 deck. I think once you set up the Monstrosity, again, it spoils for the Druid ahead. They have the revived 3 taunt minions, and this Monstrosity will just keep coming back and back and back. You'll also probably put Unkiliacs in your deck. That will give you lifesteal, it will give you removal, and it's just going to be an all-out pain in the arse to remove. Because I think this package is going to be so good between Warrior and Druid, you're going to have to run Ham as well in the deck. Therefore, I've given these 3 cards 5 stars. I think these will all go into a tier 1 deck. All All as well, by the way, is incredible. 3 mana, draw 3 cards. Really, really good. I think this card will also go into the Hunter Warrior package as well, as a tutor mainly. Then, this might be the hottest of hot takes. I think the Ride Cleaver won't make this deck, so I've only given it 2 stars. I think people will test it. There is obviously like an insane high roll on the Ride Cleaver. The problem is it has such an insane low roll as well. And I feel like if the Ride Cleaver ever got really, really good, people would just run 2 copies of Rustrot Viper, and it would make the Ride Cleaver really bad. My analogy of this, and why I think it's a bit questionable of the card, is currently Highlander Warrior is running Bran, right? And it's a huge tempo loss the turn you play Bran, because you're playing an 8 mana 2/4, kind of do nothing, right? Obviously, though, you get an, for the rest of the game, effect on the card. And normally that leads you to eventually winning the game. It's basically you have this turn off, a turn to stabilize, and then you'll win from then on if you've stabilized. Ride Cleaver, on the other hand, is sort of taking a turn off. 7 mana player 4/2 weapon is not good. It's pretty bad. Then you're probably on the next turn going to set up getting a bunch of cards. That's probably going to be via All You Can Eat. Maybe the Druid location as well to allow you to discover some big taunt minions that go into your sandwich. And at some point at the end of all of that, you'll swing with the weapon, you'll get a sandwich, and then you have to pay 2 mana as well to make the sandwich go off as well. You might get this off in 2 turns, but I think more realistically, you're probably going to get getting 3 turns. And what do you get at the end of the day? You get a board of big stuff. What would you have had if you just played Taunt Warrior normally? A board of big stuff by that point. And as I said, if you get Vipered on the Ride Cleaver the turn afterwards, you're kind of fucked. Like, you will have lost so much tempo because you'll have a sandwich with nothing in it. I assume you get a 2 mana card in your hand, which is just a dead spell, basically. It's really horrible, and you've basically done 7 mana do nothing. Maybe 7 mana do 4 damage. So, I think because of those reasons, that if this card was ever good, people would just counterplay to it. I don't think people will run it in the tier 1 deck. I think it'll get refined and removed eventually, so I'll give it 2 stars. I definitely will be testing this on the early decks I use, because it is a fun card. It's a sandwich in your hand. But I have some reservations over it. Similarly, actually, I have reservations over Food Fight and Line Cook as well. I think Line Cook is just too slow. I mentioned that there is a card in Paladin right now, the tradable minion, that gives you multiple copies of the minion. I see Line Cook as being like that as well. I think it's just too slow. I know potentially you could get like infinite Line Cooks, and if you buff them with Char and a couple of more circles, you just get infinite of these big cards. But I just think it's going to be too slow at the end of the day, and there's better things to put your big stats onto, aka Leroy Jenkins, and just charge it into the face instead. So I don't see that being a thing. And I think Food Fight is just prohibitively expensive, and I don't mean in terms of mana. Obviously 3 mana is not too expensive. However, you basically can't run any cheap minions in your deck, and I would say you probably can't run minions below like 5 cost in your deck, otherwise it's simply not worth it. Because reminder, Food Fight, you will not get the battle cry on these cards. Obviously the dream is that you play Food Fight into something like Blade Storm and you cheat out Monstrosity. That's really good, right? But I think you have to like bastardize your deck so much to make sure the Food Fight goes off. Instead, I think you'll try and be a bit more consistent. You'll keep playing like minions along the way. Play a little bit more tempo-y than otherwise you might want to do, is like a this control-y cheaty deck. I just think it'll be more consistent that way, rather than hope that Food Fight hits one of your big guys, or you manifest your deck just to have big guys in it, and then you struggle to survive until you get the Food Fight off. So that are my thoughts about the Warrior package. Anyway, that is the second from last star reveal. Next time we will do Druid, Mage, and the neutral cards. So join me then. And again, reminder, Theorycraft stream ongoing right now, and if you watch on Twitch, it's 2 free packs, so well worth it. Anyway, see you later.